I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Happy Friday. Welcome to Sab's podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest tonight is Matt Parker. He is a part of Railroad Workers United, and he's been here before. Matt, thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you for having me back, Sabrina. It's good to be here with you again.
Awesome. Okay, so Matt, last time you were here, it was because at that point in time, you guys were talking about going on strike. And there was the situation with Congress not approving the 7-day sick days. But since then, other things have happened. And I almost feel like the situation that's happening in East Palestine is almost like karma in a sense, because I'm sure as you have heard, there was a train that did derail in East Palestine, Ohio. And that train was carrying chemicals that were released into the air and apparently also the water system there in East Palestine. So the residents are now experiencing symptoms such as headaches, runny nose. They're having issues with their sight as well. So I'm curious to hear from you, because I do know one of the issues that the railroad workers were pushing back against were the safety issues and the safety concerns. When you look back at this situation that happened in East Palestine, Ohio, do you feel like this could have been prevented? And what else do you think should have been done?
If you watch the media briefing that was held by the National Transportation Safety Board on the day that they released their preliminary report, Chair Hamidi made this accident, like all other accidents, was preventable. What it comes down to is how much effort are you going to put into savings, to oversight, to doing what you can to make sure that these trains run safely. So could this accident have been prevented? I would agree with Chip, could have. How that's going to be revealed through the course of the investigation in their final report.
I have a clip here because this was released recently that now it's not just the residents of East Palestine, Ohio that are having illness. It's also some of the railroad workers that are also experiencing an illness as well. So I want to play this clip here from Case Study QB. So shout out to Case for capturing this, and I'll go ahead and bring in Mary Lee as well. Let's go ahead and introduce Mary Lee. Mary Lee is back as well. She was a railroad worker as well. We're just getting into the situation that happened in East Palestine, Ohio, Mary Lee.
Okay.
So here we go.
Meanwhile, leaders of 12 railroad unions, they met with Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg yesterday to address the derailment and safety improvements. Now, the same day, the Teamsters sent a letter to the Secretary and the Governor of Ohio. They say that Norfolk Southern put its workers at risk by not providing protective equipment. Days after the derailment, several railroad employees reported experiencing symptoms. And CNN has reached out to Norfolk Southern for comment on that letter. But for now, let's talk to Tony Cardwell. He's the general president of the union Brotherhood of Maintenance of Ways Employees Division. Tony, thank you for your time. First, talk to me about these symptoms. Are your members experiencing them, and what are they?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Victor. Yeah, our members are experiencing the symptoms, headaches, eye irritation, throat irritation, skin irritation, nausea, sickness. They were put on scene shortly after the derailment and had been working on that scene for quite a while after, fixing and repairing the track. That's what our members do. They fix and repair and rebuild track. And ultimately, they were put on scene and were being told they were not provided the proper personal protective equipment. They were working out there in street clothes and leather boots and leather shoes. And obviously, those aren't appropriate barriers for the contaminants that were on the ground.
And they
Mary Lee, I want to bring you in really quick. I have a question in reference to the railroad workers not being provided PPE. Does that sound normal to you? Because I know obviously this isn't the first time that a train has derailed, but does that sound like typical protocol in a situation like this?
It's typical protocol to not provide rail workers with safety equipment that they need on a day-to-day basis, much less in the case of an emergency. It was a fight throughout COVID to get any kind of sanitizing equipment. We order through some bizarre online thing now for safety equipment, which may or may not arrive. If it does arrive, it may be 6 months worth. But yesterday, it's been on back order for 3 months, so you still don't have it. And I fundamentally believe that in their drive for profits and to clean up this black eye as quickly as they can to get the focus off them, that the railroad probably did tell them, hey, good enough, make do. That's what I think led to this. It led to this derailment, this policy of more with less, get out there and do it, get it done. We don't have any tools for you. Well, figure it out. So yeah, I think it's very likely that they did something like that, because it also fits in with their political agenda of claiming that the air and water are clean. Yeah. That they're safe. They are not safe. There's still dead fish popping up everywhere. People are nauseated, getting migraine headaches. It's not safe. It's absurd, but it's all part of the narrative on the part of the NS and the other railroad companies to say everything's fine after a major crash that poisoned this community and every other community downstream.
Very disappointing. One of the things I did notice, a lot of the media coverage that I saw of this, first of all, mainstream media took a while to cover it. I think those of us in independent media covered it first. But I noticed that there's a lot of people walking around with no protection at all, no mask or anything. Like Erin Brockovich is there. I don't know if you heard about that, but she went to visit East Palestine because she has experience dealing with these types of issues with chemical spills and environmental issues as well. But it was just really interesting to me, both her, Pete Buttigieg, several people walking around, no mask, no protective gear, anything like that. And to me, I'm just thinking like the chemicals are still in the air. Obviously, the water, they're claiming that the water is safe. I don't think it is, based on what I've heard from people who actually live in that area. But who do you think, and I'm going to pivot to you, Matt, who do you think is responsible here? Do you think it's Norfolk Southern, or do you feel like it's more so management in place that is to blame for this?
What in particular are you talking about? The lack of personal protective equipment, or are you talking about the incident as a whole?
Both. Let's go with both.
Well, let me start with the personal protective equipment. Let me step aside from East Palestine for a minute and talk about an issue that we've had out here where I'm at that's still ongoing that we deal with. It's back to the devastating wildfire we had out here in the summer of 2021. The railroads in the affected areas ran what they call fire trains. They had these tank cars with water in them, equipped with pump, this kind of stuff. They put these on the track, allegedly to protect their tracks, to protect their structures and stuff like that. But they were actually out there, additionally, actively fighting fire on the track and fires. I listened to a night of 250. Oh. Now, I don't know if you ever heard the term Nomex. They're shirts out of that material that are flame-proof. Media personnel are not allowed on fire scenes. They're not allowed anywhere close to a without no shirts, with other type of gear. And had these railroad employees out there in these areas without any of this equipment whatsoever. It was recklessly irresponsible on the part of management. Management loved it because it made them look great. They were getting all press on that. Look what we're doing to help fight. But they put every one of those employees at grave risk, and they continue to do so. And again, this is something that we've talked about here in the we're going to have to address. How that relates to East Palestine, this is what you get when you're dealing with people who are coordinating a response or who are directing a response, who have no idea what they're doing. And we're seeing some of this in the objections that the Pennsylvania governor has expressed regarding Norfolk Southern's actions in response to this, and the fact that he's actually referred it to his attorney general for possible criminal charges in what they've done. I have read, and I have some experience before I worked for the railroad when I had a more predictable schedule and had time to participate in trainings and stuff, in doing volunteer work, not fighting fires, but support work for the fire on some of these wildfires out here in the West. And even though we were not assigned to fight fires and we were not even intended to be out in the fire area, just in the event that we found ourselves in an active burn area, the wildfire cooperators that we volunteered for required us to have certain equipment to participate in this activity.
And Matt, I think you're breaking up just a little bit, Matt.
None of that training. So, I mean, they don't even know what it is they should be doing. So, and that's the responsibility of the railroads. So.
That's interesting. Matt, I think you're breaking up just a little bit. Do you want to log off and log back in? Try that. Sometimes it helps too if you turn off your video. It's just the audio. Yeah. But Mary Lee, I want to pivot back to you while Matt does that. I want to go back to this video. I want to play a little bit more of this because more information is coming out about this now. And I had a feeling this was going to happen, that other people were going to get sick too, not just the people who live in East Palestine. So I want to play a little bit more of this here.
We're experiencing those symptoms on scene, but are they still weeks later, still feeling those symptoms?
We are receiving reports that they are, and unfortunately, when you don't just, it's not limited to just you at the workplace. It's also brought home with you to your family. So we're concerned about the families of those folks as well, and we hope that there are no residual effects from this. But it's hard to believe that there wouldn't be, considering the contaminants that they were exposed to.
So you say that Norfolk Southern did not provide the protective equipment. We've reached out, as I said, and have not gotten comment from the company. Have you reached out? Have you had any communication with Norfolk Southern about that element specifically?
We did. As soon as I found out, we had an immediate safety stand down. They just simply told us that they were going to investigate the matter. They did seem concerned, and they did seem like they wanted to figure out if there really was, what we were saying was true. They should have already known this. They didn't deny what happened, what we said happened, what was reported to us, not by one, not by two, but 30 or 40 members that had told us this was, what was going on. So the reports that we provided to them, they simply stated that they were going to review them and go out to the scene and talk to the folks. I don't think that's been done. I would hope that they would do this in a more timely manner. It's important that our members are protected, and I do believe that they were exposed in a way they shouldn't have been.
Do you believe, and I'll start with you, Mary Lee, do you believe that the railroad workers that are experiencing symptoms from this incident in East Palestine, do you believe they're going to be awarded any type of compensation or anything, or even paid time off, so to speak?
I couldn't really venture to guess on that. It would depend on if they filed a injury on the job report. Of course, anybody that files an injury on the job, that's been one of our fights over the many, many years, is that we are often victimized for having reported unsafe conditions or having reported a personal injury as a result of their unsafe conditions. Oftentimes that can lead to at least discipline against the individual worker, and in the most extreme reaction by the railroads to an injury report, dismissal on the street. So I think that while there might be still quite a bit of hesitance to even report thoroughly what has happened to you in terms of on-the-job injuries, that it's quite likely that the workers who are working in the concentration of the chemicals, which is what they're concentrated right there where the chemicals were released in terms of the ground, the soil, that of course it's quite likely that they'll react to it in the same way that many citizens of East Palestine reacted, which is by getting sick. That they report the same things. So of course it's in the railroad's interest to mitigate any claims from the residents of East Palestine, as well as any railroad worker who has been adversely affected by the chemicals involved in the derailment, and oftentimes are forced to work without proper equipment just to protect themselves. So I think we'll have to see if as people like you just keep sounding the alarm as to what's going on in the railroad industry in this country, in terms of the rail workers, but also in terms of our communities that we live and work in, the harder it is for the railroad to retaliate against workers. So we'll see how it all pans out. But I personally have felt the incredible victimization for reporting an injury. There is big pressure. They sent the terminal superintendent to my private doctor to meet me as I went to get medical care. These are tactics that are used routinely by the railroads, and the threat always is over our heads of being victimized. Were we to take time off, for example, sick time, since we're not allowed that anyway, by and large, to even be off, the railroad now has another handle. They can claim as unrelated to retaliation. It's just coincidental that, oh, you took too many days off, you hit your threshold, now we're going to institute discipline. I've never seen transparency on the part of a single Class 1 railroad, or honesty for that matter, in the courts or in the press conferences that take to explain what they're doing, how they're responding, and to be clear answers, not just, oh no, we would never do that, or whatever spin they put on it. But they have transparency has never been their forte. It's just kind of the opposite.
Yeah, I did notice when they had the first town hall, I noticed Norfolk Southern didn't even show. And I know the residents were really upset, really upset about that. And I wonder too, in reference to, because it wasn't just this incident, like after this incident happened, there was another derailment in Texas. There was one in South Carolina. There was one in Arizona. And so a lot of us that have not worked in the railroad industry, we're sitting back and we're like, what is happening here? Like, is that normal to each of you? Is it normal to have multiple derailments, one after another, within like the same 2 weeks? I'll go to you, Matt. I think you just have to unmute. You're unmuted now. I think you should be able to. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, we can see you, but we can't hear you. He might have had a connection issue. I'll go back to
let me try this. I'm still having some issues here, so I might have to make a change.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's freezing on them. I'll pivot back to you, Mary Lee. Like, is it normal to have that many like derailments back to back within like 2 weeks?
I can't really say what's normal or not. There are probably, I think that the last thing I read was there are 1,200 derailments in the country per year is the average. So obviously some years there are more and other years not. Does this speak volumes that we're even having this many? Yes. Even 1,200 a year, 1,000 a year, 800 a year, that's too many. And most of them are preventable with a monetary and political and willful attitude towards really promoting, allowing the workers to promote safety on the job. So that's what we're still kind of stuck in. We haven't been able to make that leap forward. And I just want to add, Michigan's another state that had a derailment in the last 2 weeks. Ohio had a second one, and that follows a derailment in Ohio near Sandusky, which is on the Lake Erie, which is still in October of last year, which is still not cleaned up. The NS has still not cleaned up the wreck from October. There was a road that was just recently opened, and there's still roads that are closed as a result of that derailment. So I think that the railroads are kind of like the elf on a shelf. If they're looking at you, you're going to throw a few pennies this way or that way. If the elf is somewhere else and not, doing Santa's job, or I never even had this as a kid, but then you're nicely dressed and no bad words slip out of your mouth when you're waiting on Santa. It's the same kind of thing. When the focus of attention is on NS, well, they're going to try to do things a little better, as well as deny what their standard operating practices are. But I wanted to point out that recently, I can't remember the source, but there were tapes that were made. I believe it was on the UP, and I can't even give you the state, where now it's a big expose that the bosses were caught on tape being recorded, telling Carmen, "Oh, we can't afford to do this. We got to move these cars out. Get those cars out. We're not doing any bad bearings today." And that kind of pressure is what exists in virtually every workplace on the railroad in this country. And it's been going on for years. Improper brake tests, no brake tests at all. The federal government allowing railroads to run trains for 1,000 miles without a complete air test on cycle trains. They call them long distance trains. There are a number of it's all very murky as you get into the regulations. Come to find out, the federal government doesn't regulate the hotbox detectors that went off as they were derailing. One did, and one 20 miles before that gave no audible warning, but showed an elevated temperature on the bearing. Those are not even regulated by the federal government. They allow the railroads to decide what is the heat at which a bearing will fail. And it's not a subjective question. It's a pretty objective question, but the railroads have the subjective power to say, well, we'll set ours as 280, or we'll set ours at 156. And therefore, this car went by at least 2 detectors where it was showing an increase in the not just an increase in the heat, but an increase in the rate of the heat. So it went from heating up gradually to heating up very rapidly. And the detector 20 miles before should have said, whoa, stop. We got a deal. But that, of course, once again, would interfere with the railroads, all of the class ones, their fight for nothing but pure profit. Profit over the lives, health, and safety of not only the rail workers on the rails, but the workers and farmers and families in our communities, in the communities that we traverse. It is all across this country, from east to west, north to south. So that's what I think our real thing is that we're facing, and how to organize our own response as working people against this. Because we see that the government doesn't even regulate something as important as that, as hotbox detectors. I think that I'd like to see the records on that car for the last 6 months. I'll just say that. I just want to see them. I worked on the railroad and through freight operations primarily for over 30 years, well over 30 years. And I've never seen a car go from 0 to explosion. Basically, the wheel basically explodes. It seizes up and it just seizes up, won't turn, and then it wrenches off. I've never seen that happen in 40 miles. I've never seen it. I think it goes back to the other practices that NS workers and others, Carmen, the people who inspect the cars, are reporting. They're told to let the bearings go if they're even if they're leaking. Leaking means that they're supposed to be closed bearings. You're not supposed to leak. Leaking is bad. It's like you move your car, there's a puddle of oil. Well, you don't have to be a mechanic to say, this is not good.
Right.
Well, the same thing, only much more critically, is the question of the wheel bearing. And if you're being forced to work quicker because the railroad won't maintain staffing levels, so what used to take 5 or 6 minutes to thoroughly inspect a car prior to its departure, you're doing it in 90 seconds because otherwise you'll be fired, you'll be on the street. It's all part of the same culture of PSR, precision scheduled railroading, they call it, which, of course, is none of the above. But it's part
Is this the same? Oh, real quick, is this the same type of, when you say wheel bearing, is this the same type of wheel bearing that's on your car?
Basically, yes.
Okay.
Basically, yes. When your front bearing goes out on a car, you can't steer it. That's like the big thing. It starts to go bad, get it replaced because you're in a world of hurt at 70 miles an hour. Well, imagine 9,500 feet more of your car and 17,000 more tons behind you. And that bearing goes out on a wheel. The in-train forces, just simple physics, the laws of motion, are exponential at that point. When you're going 47, I believe it was, miles an hour, and suddenly a wheel is wrenched because the bearing overheated and seized. And it's on the axle. It took the axle off, basically. And then everything else hit from behind. So, yeah, it's very much like it. It's not different, although there are more bearings per car than rail car than you would have, of course, on your automobile. Mm-hmm. But for a regular person can clearly understand what kind of situation occurred. And they would also know that if you're driving a car and the front bearing is going out, because it ain't acting right. There's something wrong. Even if you're not a mechanic, there's something wrong. It smells, whatever. So all the things that could have been done to prevent this kind of thing, I think, are show us the shady practices of all the Class 1 railroads who have adopted this same business model of suck every cent out of the railroad and consequences be damned, because we'll deal with those later. It's cheaper to pay for this derailment than it is to operate a safe railroad system. That's the sad truth, in my opinion. It's cheaper to just chase the money. And that's what they're doing, with no regard for human life, human health, or the livelihoods. I feel for these people. I was born in Ohio. Not too many people know that. I don't like wave a Buckeye or something. I'm not a patriot, but I understand the smaller towns, because as a child, of course, I visited many of them, family and stuff. So I feel for them in my soul, because they lost not just their trust, their trust in the government, their trust that these corporations will do what they say they do and operate safely, but they lost their livelihoods. Who is going to, and from all around, who is going to buy crops from any area that's fed by that water? I mean, there's just, who's going to be able to sell their house? So you sink all this money, spend your whole life working. You see a lot of these people on television, and the house is now loan-wise or equity-wise or whatever underwater. The property values are just overnight sunk. And I think it's unconscionable what the railroad has done. It's unthinkable that they should not be charged criminally for the actions that they have done. I'm talking about the executives and the chief executive officer of the NS. Criminal charges should be at least considered across this country for these kinds of actions that have gone unpunished now for decades.
So I'm glad you said decades, Mary Lee, because there's been a lot of mainstream media pundits blaming this on. They said, oh, it's Donald Trump's fault. Some people say it's Obama's fault. But as you just mentioned, decades. So this has been an issue for a long time across administration. So people really need to understand that the safety concerns have been a problem. When do you remember? I'll pivot to you, Matt. When do you remember the railroad companies changing the rule to where, from what I understand now, there's only one person? They changed it from like 2 people to 1 person, like on the train, or they tried to reduce the staff. When do you remember that first happening, when they started to reduce the staff?
Staff reductions, I could tell you that I'm aware of, go back at least as far as 1985, because I was one of the union representatives who was at the head of passing a law here in Nevada that requires a minimum of 2 persons on the crew of a train on Class 1 or Class 2 railroad. And in my research, Nevada had previously had a law on the books requiring a minimum crew of 5 people. There were agreements made with the unions at a time when the railroad industry was struggling financially back in the early 80s. And the unions actually sat down with the railroads and agreed that with technology and everything that they could safely reduce that crew size. And in order to accommodate that in Nevada, Nevada's law was repealed. It was a hell of a fight to get it back on the books. So again, I can tell you that this issue goes back at least that far in 1985. What the unions never expected when they were doing this and agreeing to crew size reductions back in the 1980s is that we would get to the point where the railroads would actually push to get that down to 1 operator only in the cab of a locomotive. It's not safe. It's not acceptable. It will not be efficient. And that's why Nevada is one of the states now that has pushed and put these laws on the books. In the case of Nevada, put it back on the books. And why now you're seeing finally movement at the national level to do this nationally.
So I hope everyone listening heard that. Going back to the 80s, because right now a lot of people are pointing fingers at one party, the other party, one, either Trump or Obama or whatever, but this is going back. Matt remembers going all the way back to the 1980s. I have a clip here I want to show you. Now, this is Pete Buttigieg. He has received a lot of criticism, as you can imagine, because he's the Secretary of Transportation. And some people feel like he did not respond in a timely manner. They're like, where have you been? This kind of statement. He's going to discuss here about the possibility about fining the railroad companies. So I just want to play this clip here, and I want to get your take on this.
Mr. Secretary, as you just pointed out, there are a number of high-hazard trains on the rails in this country, and there have been toxic chemical spills around East Palestine prior to this one, in that county and other places in Ohio, and certainly around the country. But when you get into talking about why this happened, and even though it's called 100% preventable by the chairman of the NTSB, when you get into talking about that, the talk tends to make the railroad lobbyists sound like the equals of the gun lobby, that nothing can be done because they're so powerful. One of the aspects that you mentioned is fines for the railroad. How are the fines set? What would this company have to pay as a fine, given they make millions of dollars? And what can be done to hike the fine up that it's mind-bogglingly high?
Yeah. I can't speak to the findings that are still coming back from the investigation of this incident and whether a violation is going to be found there. But what I will say is that when a violation is found, there is this statutory limit on the fines that we can assess. And I think that they need to be much tougher. The legislation that's been put forward in the Senate is one example of a way to do that. I think it pegs it to 1% of the company's income. And that's something that would be more likely to get their attention than $225,000 or so, which is the legal maximum, even in a case that results in a fatality. Now, again, I do want to say that there is other work being done on the EPA side to hold them accountable for the cleanup. That's already happening, and they're already paying for that. And by the way, that's an example of why we need a strong EPA. So a lot of the same voices who have been quick to get onto this issue were trying to dismantle the EPA just a couple of 3 years ago. And now we're seeing an example of how the EPA is delivering accountability and helping to make sure that Norfolk Southern cleans up the mess that it made. But here on the transportation policy side, whether we're talking about fines, whether we're talking about standards, whether we're talking about technology, there is clearly more to be done. And, the power of the railroad lobby is enormous. I've seen it for myself. There was a rule having to do with braking. Again, I'm not going to make any claims about how that might have applied in this case. There was a rule about braking that was put in under the Obama administration in 2015. There were 5 lawsuits in different jurisdictions to try to take it down, and they went after Congress, and they went to this agency. And sure enough, eventually that rule got stripped away. So that's just one example of the muscle that railroad lobby can flex in this city. But I really believe there is a chance to have a change in direction right now.
Okay. Do you believe that increasing the fines on the railroad company, in this case, Norfolk Southern, do you believe that increasing those fines would actually make the railroad company change some of these policies where they're going to go back and they're going to change the safety or improve the safety measures? Do you think that will actually make them act?
Well, I'm in favor of increased fines. Make no mistake about it. But I would like to say that it would take Warren Buffett is the head of Berkshire Hathaway, and they own the BNSF. They made how many billions last year? So to fine any railroad, to fine them as a punitive measure, we're talking tens of millions. We're not talking a million. We're talking tens of millions per violation. Now, I have been involved in fighting for safety on the rails for as long as I've been working on the rails. And one of the things that I did over the years was try to use the Federal Railroad Administration, the FRA, which is in the transportation section, which Buttigieg doesn't oversee directly, but that's part of his general stuff. And to get them to act, number one, almost takes an act on a particular safety issue, almost takes an act of Congress. And if you do all that and present the fully vetted civil case, basically, to the FRA to fight the railroads, they sometimes do fine them. The railroads turn around and pay pennies on the dollar. They pay pennies on the dollar. And the FRA feels like it's lucky to get that. It's all part of this mindset that money should equal power in the resolution of the issues that in this country. And the railroads put in I saw some figures that were very low, 12 million from the NS over 5 or 6 years. I don't believe that for a minute. I do not believe that for a minute. But let's just say it is only that. Then the lobbyists come in, and the ones who maybe were just voted out of office on the Capitol Hill. Now they're lobbyists. Yep. So they come in and, I was going to say a different phrase, but whisper in the ear of these people. And of course, you can't just whisper in their ear in a dark alley. You got to take them to dinner, and you got to get good wine or whatever else. So there's all of this dirty money going on. And then there's the direct intervention for decades now of the railroad in trying to not just politically convince, spin, lie, and everything else, but actually putting in millions of dollars, whether it's just in lobbying or whether it's for someone who who's running for office, who is very lax on supporting regulation for the railroad or anybody else. There's always somebody to grease their pockets, and they have gotten a blind eye turn now for many, many years, many years. And we continue to die on the rails. We continue to get injured on the rails. Our communities continue to get poisoned. Our our brothers and sisters, and it's not just East Palestine, but on every rail line in this country. They are not held, the railroads are not held to a standard. They're just simply not held to any real standard. The brake rule that you discussed is one thing that would help. It's called electronically controlled pneumatic brakes. It's a change in a 150-year-old brake system that we use, over 150, where brakes apply on each car. That is not something that could be implemented tomorrow, but the process of getting it done could be implemented tomorrow. But there are immediate actions that we should take: the length of the train, the tonnage of the train, putting and making an emergency order here and now. There will be no train run without a minimum of 2 people. It's called an emergency order. The FRA puts them out all the time. They put them out on us about cell phone usage after the wreck in California between a commuter train and a freight, where it was alleged, and I have no reason to speak one way or the other, but it was alleged and accepted that the one person was suicidal or whatever he was, texting and running a passenger train, which is no engineer would defend any action like that. That's absolutely. If I had been on the train and I wasn't the engineer, I think I would have put him out of the seat and ran it myself rather than see that happening. That's a whole nother issue. But after that, the FRA put out an emergency order. No cell phones in use unless with all these things. It happened, I bet, lickety split. There's no reason we cannot have emergency orders right here, right now, to begin to address these questions. Stop it with no more 2-mile long trains. I believe it was 2008, the average train, or maybe it was 10 years ago. I've read so many statistics that kind of get stuck in my head. But I sort of lost my train of thought with that.
That's okay.
Yeah,
I was going to ask them. I'll pivot to Matt really quick. I've lived in apartment complexes that, for whatever reason, always had like a railroad track behind them. I don't know why, but these things happened. And it was usually the freight trains that came through. Sometimes like 3 o'clock in the morning, every time you could hear here comes that train. And it made me wonder, when this incident happened, what would have happened if that railroad would have been just an inch closer to the residents' homes in East Palestine when that train derailed? And that's what I'm thinking about. Like, what if that railroad was closer? And just think about other things that could have happened. Like, it could have ruined, people could have been like physically killed. And I just feel like it seems like our government really is not thinking about that, so to speak. And one of the issues that has come up, and I want to play this clip here, people have drawn attention to the fact that the president is nowhere to be found. And multiple people have come. So I told you, so Tulsi Gabbard has been there. Aaron Brockovich has been there. Pete got there eventually, but other people made it there before he did. And he's the Secretary of Transportation. And then in this clip here, Case Study QB, Case didn't get this one, but in this clip here, Don Lemon actually asked Pete Buttigieg about whether or not President Biden should come to East Palestine. And I want you to hear this response here, because I think this is very telling.
Now that you have been to East Palestine, you've seen the devastation firsthand. It's his decision ultimately, but I have to ask you, do you think that the President Biden, should visit and speak with families there?
Well, what I know is he's been concerned about this, about the people are going through. I think also a visit at that level can sometimes have a lot of disruptive effects, so would need to be thought of carefully. But I'm certainly glad that I went.
Now that you have been to East Palestine,
So basically he said that he thinks that by the president coming, that it's actually going to be disruptive. And this is just shocking to me, because we have to think back to the fact that Obama went to Flint late. He got there late, but he eventually went there. And Donald Trump, who's not even president anymore, went to East Palestine. First of all, is it Palestine or Palestine? Because everybody pronounces it differently. I'm going to ask you, Mary Lee.
The residents of the town call it East Palestine.
Okay.
East Palestine with a a different sound to the eye. Of course, everybody who reads world news, their tongue automatically says Palestine. But it's like many other, Uvalde, Texas. Nobody knew how to say that forever, because it's not an English, Anglo-Saxon type word. So anyway, that's how they call it. So that's why I use it. But most of the time, I will slip into calling it Palestine myself. But that's how they say it, is East Palestine. And that the least I can do is try to get their name right with all the suffering that has been inflicted on these brothers and sisters from another town.
Does it concern you, and I'll ask you, Matt, does it concern you that the president has not made a visit to East Palestine, Ohio?
I think when it comes to presidents visiting things like this, it's largely political. It's making an appearance, just like you said. Does the president make an appearance? That's what it is. It's making an appearance. What the effect of that has, I think it doesn't directly have an effect on the incident itself, but sometimes maybe that is reassuring to people, and it gives the impression that the president cares. Looking back to, I believe, I can't remember what year it was right offhand now, but 1 October here in Nevada, the shooting incident that took place at the concert in Las Vegas. President Trump came out and visited victims of that. Again, did it have any kind of lasting effect on what the outcome was? No, but it showed that he cared, and it showed that it was reassuring to people. So should the president go to some place like that? I think largely that question is a political one. Perhaps maybe being on the ground and standing in there might give him a different perspective on how serious this is and actions that are needed. So I think that's kind of subjective as to how you view it. As far as the comment of it being disruptive, I really don't see it as being disruptive. Right. But in terms of what it will accomplish, is it going to accomplish much other than perhaps reassuring people and maybe giving the president a different perspective, seeing it firsthand? I don't know.
What about you, Mary Lee? Do you think he should visit?
Well, I think disruptive, that any disruption Biden would cause by visit is a drop of water in the ocean compared to the disruption in the lives of the people of East Palestine. So I think that Biden needs to come out on this clearly and openly on the side of the citizens of East Palestine. And by that, I mean Biden should be standing up, speaking that he heard us on September 15th, all over 100,000 of us that wanted to go on strike over these central issues, including safe operation of the railroads. He could stand up and say, Norfolk Southern will be fully examined. We demand transparency from them and all the other railroads. He could actually say something that would put pressure on the railroads to be responsible, put pressure on the government and his own agencies within his administration, insisting that the railroad be held accountable, NS be held accountable, that the other railroads be held accountable for their intransigent fight against the health and safety of not only the workers, but of all of these communities, and to fight for to implement these real safety proposals, like length of train maximums, minimum crew staffing, a minimum amount that of accountability would be like a gazillion fold as to what it is now. So I think that is the main thing, not just being there or not being there. I mean, it would have made more sense to show up, I would think. Mm-hmm. By the same token, I think that we have to understand that politicians are not real quick to jump on the side of what's right till they lick their finger and put it in the air to try to figure out which way the wind is blowing. I think they're very surprised to find that the wind was not only blowing a certain direction, but it was blowing real hard. And it's going to keep blowing real hard until the American people get some answers, get some clarity, not how this happened, how we are going to prevent it in the future, although I have ideas on all those, and a firm commitment from the Biden administration and both of the major electoral parties, Democrats and the Republicans, that they will force the railroads to stand down on this attack on those who work on the rails and the implicit attack of poisoning in a community. That he will stand on the side of he wants to talk about being the common Joe, the common man, stand up on vocally, critically, and honestly on the side of the common person who has been totally beaten back by these railroads for decades now, with a sharp pivot into downward, more of a vortex downward in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So that's what faces us. What are we going to actually convince people to do, and what we're going to demand? And just about now, I'm pretty sick to death of hearing about how much they care, and from everyone, from the Trump to everybody except Erin I can't say her name.
Erin Brockovich.
Brockovich, yes, except for her. Now, she because she has a history, because she fights, because what comes out of her mouth is based on what her feet have done. Her feet in the struggle have done. And I just want to say one final thing. We don't need any more experts. We certainly need all the facts to come out. But we have 100,000 experts on how to run a railroad working on the railroad today. Not equally everyone with a view toward this or that, but who understand what is going on, who understand what needs to be done, and are beginning to step forward and demand that these things do occur, that safe operations, that we tilt the camera, we tilt the focus away from the maximum profit for the hedge funds and the other owners of the railroad, and turn the spotlight back toward navigating our way into a safe rail transportation system that is regulated, that does not, that cannot and does not seek to do nothing but extract profit at the expense of every other single thing. It enriches the 0.1% of the extraordinarily, obscenely rich in this country. And the rest of us deal with the chemicals, the implosion. And we need to begin to turn that around. And I'm interested. I keep watching what both parties are saying, but I'm not impressed. And I certainly haven't seen anybody that has, not across the board, any single person, but the answers isn't worth studying.
Talk is cheap and actions speak louder than words.
That's right. That's right. Do you think there's if given the opportunity, would either of you like to nationalize the railroads? And I ask that question because it has been pointed out to me that even Norfolk Southern, they have there's corporate connections there. BlackRock's connected to Norfolk Southern, as well as other industries as well. If you were given the opportunity, would you vote to nationalize the railroad system?
Absolutely. In fact, today. In fact, I hope that I, along with not just Matt, but thousands of other workers, together, we can convince the overwhelming majority of Americans to support that. Because we know that we cannot rely on the owners of these railroads to operate the railroads safely, to operate the railroads in the interest of the farmers who have to move their grain, for the other, in particular, to my mind, smaller shippers who cannot get their goods moved, The railroads they have the potential to be the safest method of transport of dangerous chemicals. And the fact is that there's nobody, I think, who looks at it in this country who thinks that we don't need different chemicals. What they are and stuff is really for somebody else to take on. But yes, the only way that we can organize the rail to be safe and productive and meet the needs of of potential passengers, we should have passenger rail, for God's sake. The only industrialized country in the world, basically, that has Amtrak instead of a true national rail, where you can get from Chicago to the West Coast in less than 3 days.
Yep.
So there are a lot of things that could be used to serve the interests of the vast majority of this country, which is those who live and work in these communities. It is not the 1/10% who are in it to suck out every last cent at the expense of all of us. And this is what we've seen in the East Palestine events, not just the crash, but the ongoing events. And I just say that I was just going to say, Matt, I wanted to hear you.
The largest contributing factor to any of the problems on the rail system these days, whether it be service issues, whether it be safety, anything, is the monopoly power that these companies have gained through mergers and acquisition. And the quickest and most assured way of fixing it would be nationalization. Every other mode of transportation uses some form of public infrastructure. Highways, our ports are owned by government entities, our public infrastructure, our airports, all that except for the railroads. And the railroads love to tout how, they are privately maintained, that they put their own capital into it and everything. But when you neglect it, as they have been doing under PSR, and abuse the system and abuse your monopoly power to where you're not providing, you're doing a disservice to the American public, then something needs to change. And this has been the focus of a lot of these hearings at the Surface Transportation Board. Everybody except maybe the railroads recognizes that we need to increase a competitive environment there in order to improve service and keep rates low and everything. But it never happens because of the monopoly power these companies have. And again, as I said, nationalization of the infrastructure would fix that.
Well said. Well said. Well, I want to thank both of you so much for coming back on. It's really interesting to me. Like I said, I feel like this is karma in a sense, because both of you and other railroad employees have tried to make your voices heard. Last year, when you tried to explain to people that there are safety issues with the railroads, that they were decreasing the number of workers, that it was more about profit, that they weren't giving people sick or paid sick days. Like, you tried to explain this to people. And I do feel like this incident that happened in East Palestine, Ohio, I feel like this is kind of like karma to Congress, because they really weren't, I don't want to say they weren't acting like they cared. They didn't see it as a sense of urgency. And that's unfortunate.
And this is the result. There will be more.
Yep.
There will be. They were very fortunate, not the people of East Palestine, of course, or people downriver, but this could have been New York City. This could have been northern New Jersey. This could have been Chicago, which is the biggest rail hub in the country. This could have been a highly populated, dense area and it could have been worse. It could have been crude oil or some other highly volatile, more explosive chemical or oil or volatile things. It could have been far worse. And there won't be anything to prevent something far worse from happening if we continue business as usual and we don't immediately hold both the owners of the railroads and the government agencies that are responsible for regulating, holding both their feet to the fire to make at least some beginning initial strides to prevent the same thing from happening over and over.
Sabrina, you talked about, if those railroad tracks had been a foot closer. This is a talking point that I've used very frequently with some of our lawmakers, that rail safety, railroad accidents maybe tend to not get the attention they do or they should, because they're not as spectacular perhaps as an airplane dropping out of the sky. And what I say is, trains typically don't drop out of the sky, but on occasion we do send some carloads of some really nasty stuff rocketing into nearby neighborhoods when things go really wrong. And one thing for your viewers here to be aware of as you talk about this, the initial isolation distance for a chlorine tank car that's breached at night is 7 to 8 miles. So you may not live anywhere near close to the tracks, and you may not routinely hear the trains going through, and therefore you don't think you're at risk. But you don't realize that this stuff can reach out and have effects over a very wide area. And it's a reason for, people to be concerned about that. Just because you don't live right next to a railroad track or something doesn't mean that a future accident involving some of this stuff isn't going to affect you.
That's right. Well said, Matt. Well, thank both of you so much for coming back on, and I'll keep my eyes peered to this story, and we'll see what happens from here. But I sincerely hope people in East Palestine get the justice that they deserve. But thank you guys so much for coming on.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you for having us again, Sabrina.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys. I hope you learned something there. One of the big things that I hope that you take with you is the fact that, again, you notice a lot of people are pointing fingers, at least mainstream media is. They're like, it's Trump's fault. And some people are like, it's Obama's fault. Matt just told you this goes back all the way to the 1980s in reference to the safety issues. So pass that on to your colleagues. Start us out real great, guys, and go ahead and hit that like button if you haven't had a chance to do so. That helps me out with the algorithm there. I'm going to go ahead and give a quick shout out to Sabby patrons. Thank you guys so much for your support. You're doing the darn thing. Thank you guys so much for becoming Sabby patrons. If you're interested in being a patron, I have 5 categories: members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and of course, the ultimate. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen on the ticker there. So thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on around here. I'm not sure why I just sang that, but it happened. Thank you guys. Okay, I'm going to go to super chats really quick. The comments on Rockfin, I'll reveal the rest of the thumbnail, and we'll get into our other stories here. So let me go ahead and quick thank you so much to Anoon for the super sticker. And thank you for this super sticker as well. These people truly think that they are so exceptional that they really think we are self-reliant in our misery. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for the super sticker, or no, chat, super chat, Roger. Broadband infra's been privatized to time to reverse. I don't know what that, broadband infrastructure been privatized, time to reverse. Maybe that's what you mean. Robert says NTSB and FAA grounded the Boeing 737 MAX for years after 2 crashes. We need that for trains. And I'll take those comments on Rockfin, Eric. I don't know why this is like, my screen is like weird. Or maybe it's just me. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Okay, Sabby, you heard what the gentleman said about they got a regulatory law put back on the books in Nevada, and now they are beginning to see that it will amplify in other states. Also, I'm going to report you to the White House counsel, HLM reference, for not reading my rock on your earlier show. So here it is. Oh, shoot. I did forget about Rockfin earlier. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I suck. See, on here, it's different because Eric actually highlights them for me. And then when I'm on RBN, I don't have a producer. So I forget sometimes. Thank you for this tip as well. I'd argue the biggest distraction is most Americans are falling behind when it comes to suffering from terrible health care and the widest income inequality gap in 100 years. When you can't make rent, mortgage, that car note, auto insurance, healthcare bill because your insurance won't cover it, then that will be your focus. Solve their personal income inequality problem. They'll have the bandwidth for foreign policy. Thank you so much for that, Roger. And thank you so much for the super sticker, Baba. Also, I want to know how you were able to change your font to that, because I can't do that. Huh. I wonder how you did that. Okay, let's go ahead and get into the thumbnail so we can see what else are we going to discuss tonight. Let's go ahead and get into it. Tonight, we are discussing Matt Taibbi, Twitter Blacklist. This is Twitter Files number 17, believe it or not. Yes, they are still going on. He is not done. We're going to get into that tonight. I'm also going to discuss King Charles is rejected. Ouch. Oof. And what does this have to do with Harry? Why is he there in the background? What happened with him? And I'm also going to discuss Korea food alert. This is a very serious story that everyone should be paying attention to. And of course, RWU was just here to talk about the the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. So let's go ahead and get into this story about Korea. This is not good, but you need to know about it, because if it's happening there, it can happen somewhere else too, and it can make its way here. Now, it was just a couple nights ago I told you that Nigeria was experiencing a cash shortage. I should be posting that clip tomorrow, so just FYI. Well, there's cash shortages, and then there are also food shortages, and this involves North Korea. So listen to this. North Korea suffers one of its worst food shortages in decades. This was posted by the is this Washington Post or Wall Street Journal? I forget. Wall Street Journal. This was posted by the Wall Street Journal yesterday. So listen to this. North Koreans are experiencing widespread hunger and dying of starvation as the country suffers one of the worst food crises in decades as a result of its international isolation and natural disasters that have damaged crops, reducing yields. So there are two things that are causing this here. You have international isolation, and you also have natural disasters that have caused damage to the crops. The North Korean regime held an urgent meeting on agriculture and the economy this week. Such a gathering is rare and indicates the seriousness of the shortages, South Korean officials said recently. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un ordered officials to resolve the food supply problems with better farming equipment and scientific methods during the 4-day plenary meeting. According to a Thursday state media report, the report didn't elaborate on specific policies, but said Mr. Kim had called for a fundamental change in agricultural production that would lead to a turning point in the country's prosperity. We need to be paying attention to what's happening to the crops here as well. If you know people that are farmers, talk to your friends that are farmers. Let's go on. North Korea has a population of 26 million, has struggled for decades to produce enough food for its people due to international isolation. We're going to explain the international isolation part in just a second. Economic mismanagement and natural disasters. But the situation worsened in recent months as a result of its border restrictions during the pandemic and floods and droughts last year that hurt its harvest. So now we're getting into the climate issues. Uh-oh, what just happened? Okay, there we go. So now we're getting into the climate issues, floods and droughts. Last May, North Korea reported its second worst drought since the country began measurements in 1981, affecting the capital city of Pyongyang and nearby provinces. Over the summer, towns along the border with China flooded after heavy rainfall. It is unlikely the country is facing mass starvation on the scale that it experienced in the 1990s, as North Korea struggled to cope with the end of support from the Soviet Union. But there are reports of deaths due to starvation. North Korea experts said the crisis is one of the worst since 1990s famine and threatens to sow instability if the regime doesn't show it is trying to address the problem. Food insecurity will lead to increased distrust in the regime. And the plenary session is aimed at showing the government is serious about resolving the food issue. That's coming from senior economists specializing in North Korean agriculture. In 2022, North Korea's food production dropped by about 180,000 metric tons from the previous year. That's a lot, you guys. The decline in food production was attributed to the drought and floods, as well as Russian export controls on fertilizer. So see, we have a couple of things that are happening here. There are the climate catastrophes. They're having floods and droughts. That's going to affect the crops. That's going to affect farming. But then also Russian export controls on fertilizer. Remember back when this crisis started with Russia and Ukraine, one of the things that was pointed out on RBN, we tried to tell you guys about the fertilizer, that Russia is a large export with fertilizer and other countries depend on that export. So when the US government puts sanctions on Russia, they're not just hurting Russia, they're hurting other countries as well. That's the problem there. That's the problem there. North Korea produced an estimated 4.5 million tons of grain last year, dropping 3.8% from 2021. More than 10 million North Koreans suffered malnourishment and hunger during the pandemic, with 41% of the population undernourished between 2019 and 2021, according to a report published last year by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And I want to get to this part right here. North Korea spends nearly a quarter of its gross domestic product on its military. According to the U.S. State Department estimates, the Kim regime spent between $340 million and $530 million on ballistic missile launches last year, which is enough to cover costs for several months of food supplies for North Korea's population. And that is according to estimates by North Korea Institute for Defense Analysis, state-run think tank in Seoul. So I want to point something out to you really quick in reference to the fertilizer issue as well. Let's keep in mind, it's not just North Korea that was relying on fertilizer from Russia. Look at all the countries in Europe that have been impacted because they're relying on gas from Russia. And this is what I think some people don't fully understand, at least in this country, is that this is affecting other countries. So sometimes when you put sanctions, we're going to get to that. Sometimes when you put sanctions on one country, it affects other countries as well, because those countries depend on export from them. We're going to get to the sanctions in North Korea in just a second. But first, I want to show you this clip here. This is from Al Jazeera. More about the food shortage in North Korea. Notice they said there, North Korea could be on the brink of famine. By the way, famine can spread. So just because North Korea is all the way over there doesn't mean it won't affect other people. And that's why you need to know about it. And that's why we need to pay attention to what's happening in the world, not just what's happening here in the United States.
This year, North Korea is dealing with several unique factors that it hasn't had to deal with in many of the previous years. One of the most significant factors is, of course, the implications from the pandemic. It's not simply the sort of meteorological conditions and the farming conditions that are going on, but it's that lack of international aid for 1 and then 2 and now 3 years that's starting to build up. And that's why we see this as a particular worry this year.
I don't know what the deal is with the music. I feel like I'm about to enter the Matrix or something. Like, I don't. I'm sorry, you guys. I don't know who picked the music, but it's kind of eerie. But anywho, notice this piece right here. When we talk about the food prices, look at what it says about rice. Analysts say there's been a rise in price for standard food items like rice. Rice, you guys. Let's go on. How many of you actually heard about that? I didn't hear about it. They had a famine apparently in the 1990s.
North Korea's agriculture system relies on farmers producing as much food as they can, and that all going into a sort of central distribution system that is handled by the state. In the past, that provided North Koreans with an adequate supply of basic nutrition. But over the last sort of 10 years or more, it started to fall apart, and it's at the level now where most North Koreans can't survive on what, if anything, they get from the state. A lot of that food that is grown goes into capital cities where the elite live, and then also to army units and the military.
You notice that part there? A lot of the food that's grown goes to capitalist cities where the elite live. So once again, rich people are fed. They're not starving. They don't have to worry about going into any type of famine. They make sure that the rich people are still protected, that they're taken care of. And the poor people just have to starve. Isn't that crazy? But that's how it is.
In places like that. North Korea can't afford to keep all of its under fives nourished properly, yet it has a program to develop nuclear weapons. It is launching missiles all the time. It's putting a satellite into orbit this year. All of that costs a massive amount of money. And it appears that agriculture is definitely second to all of that. There doesn't seem to be very much intervention from the government in all of this. The UN is very keen to get in the World Food Programme to start helping, and there are several private charities and aid groups that want to get in as well. So that's also going to be important for, I think, the harvest this year and in coming years is how much North Korea kind of admits it has a problem and accepts help from overseas, because it definitely needs the help by all the metrics we can see. This is usually a big problem in the country, and this year it just could be really, really bad.
Now, there's more, because there's another piece to this that I think is also important, which that video doesn't mention. Maybe they mention it in another video, but they don't mention it in that one. But I'm going to show you that piece right now, is that you have to also know that North Korea also was sanctioned, and not just by one country, actually by multiple countries, including us, of course. You know, we would be there, right? So this is something to think about as well. When we talk about the fact that their country is isolated, or they have this isolation experience. What to know about the sanctions on North Korea? World powers continue to punish North Korea with economic sanctions, but the pressure has so far failed to push Pyongyang towards denuclearization. So I guess what they're trying to explain here is that the goal by implementing these sanctions was to prevent them from getting closer towards any type of nuclear power. World powers have pursued economic and financial sanctions on North Korea for more than a dozen years to pressure it to denuclearize. They have also deployed sanctions to punish the regime for cyber attacks, money laundering, and human rights violations. While these measures have exacted a heavy toll on the North Korean economy, experts say their effectiveness has been undermined by the failure of some countries to enforce them and the willingness of some companies to flout them. Even if sanctions were tightened, many question whether they would achieve the desired outcome. This is the important piece. Why does North Korea face sanctions? The Democratic People's Republic of Korea has undertaken a broad range of activities over the years that has drawn international condemnation in the form of sanctions. Chief among them are the development of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. North Korea's leadership under successive Kims considers nuclear weapons the sole means to guarantee its survival. Pyongyang points to a U.S. military bases in the region, as well as the war games the United States regularly holds with its allies as a threat to its existence. So we know the United States government has over 700 bases across the world. So this is one of them. They are also in this region as well. So they feel like they need to have those weapons to protect themselves because they feel like there is the threat of the U.S. government right there in their territory. Let's go on. The DPRK ratified the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1985, but withdrew in 2003, citing U.S. aggression. It carried out its first nuclear test 3 years later. Current leader Kim Jong-un sees nuclear weapons as a military asset, an insurance policy, and a vast source of prestige all in one. They say Kim has witnessed governments in Ukraine, Iraq, and Libya be overthrown after giving up their nuclear weapons, and that he is determined not to make the same mistake. Several rounds of bilateral and multilateral negotiations on denuclearization dating back to the 1990s have failed. After June 2018 meeting in Singapore between U.S. President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, the first summit between sitting U.S. and North Korean leaders, the United States suspended a series of high-profile military exercises with South Korea. But the declaration it signed with North Korea did not produce tangible steps for denuclearization or sanctions relief. Let's go down here. I want you to look at this timeline. UN Security Council sanctions on North Korea. In 2006, you have UN Security Council Resolution 1718 condemns North Korea's first nuclear test and imposes sanctions, including on the supply of heavy weaponry, missile technology and material, and select luxury goods. 2009, Resolution 1874 strengthens sanctions after North Korea's second nuclear explosion. Then you come down to 2013, January, Resolution 2087 condemns North Korea's 2012 satellite launch and proliferation activities. And March 2013, Resolution 2094 imposes harsher sanctions in response to North Korea's third nuclear test a month prior. 2016, Resolution 2270 tightens sanctions in addition to condemning North Korea's fourth nuclear test and its 2015 test of submarine-launched missile. And in 2016 of November, Resolution 2321 bans exports of minerals, helicopters, and other items in response to North Korea's fifth nuclear test. August 2017, Resolution 2371 completely bans certain exports that were previously restricted, such as coal, iron, and seafood, after North Korea's 2 intercontinental ballistic missile tests in July. So each time as we go along, they take more and more away from them. September 2017, Resolution 2375 expands sanctions following North Korea's 6th and largest nuclear test. And December 22nd, 2017, Resolution 2397 imposes new restrictions on oil imports as well as metal, agricultural, and labor exports. May 26, 2022, China and Russia veto a U.S. drafted resolution that would impose more sanctions, including bans on tobacco and oil imports into North Korea. So they pretty much took away everything over time but the kitchen sink. Now, I want to show you the U.S. sanctions because they have the UN ones, but let's scroll down to the U.S. sanctions. Oh, did I pass it? I did. Sorry. Whoopsie. What are the U.S. sanctions? The United States has imposed unilateral sanctions on North Korea that restrict more economic activities and target a larger list of individuals and businesses than the UN sanctions. So what does that tell you? That tells you that the sanctions coming from the United States government towards North Korea, it's actually worse than the sanctions imposed by the UN. I guess we should not be surprised. They are primarily designed to impede Pyongyang's development of missile and nuclear technology, but some have come in response to North Korea's cyber attacks, such as its 2014 breach of Sony's computer system and 2017 WannaCry ransomware attack. Human rights violations, censorship, and money laundering, among other activities. Additionally, the U.S. has sanctioned, here we go, we're going to highlight this. Whee! Additionally, the U.S. has sanctioned banks, companies, and individuals outside North Korea, particularly in China and Russia, for supporting its weapons program. It's really important that we see the big picture. And we're not just, you see how all of these countries are connected. You have North Korea, you have China, you have Russia, and then you see what the United States government has, why the U.S. government has imposed them. You see what I mean? They're connected. So then let's go on here. And it goes on to say it has also fined companies for violating U.S. export controls. On several occasions, the U.S. has partially lifted its sanctions on North Korea in exchange for a promise to freeze its nuclear program and dismantle parts of its facilities. However, Pyongyang has consistently reneged on its pledges. So the U.S. Congress passed its first statute imposing sanctions on North Korea in 2016, adding to those they had already been levied by successive presidents. The law requires the president to sanction anyone involved in activities such as the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Now, where have we heard that term before? So there's more to the story. So you have to understand, if you are relying on exports from another country, which the U.S. has also imposed sanctions on, if you don't have the fertilizer, it's going to be difficult for you to grow the food, to grow the crops. Again, another reason to point out how this war is not just affecting the countries that are fighting right now. There are other countries that have also imposed sanctions on North Korea. U.S. allies, Australia, Japan, and South Korea, as well as the European Union, known as the EU, have sanctioned North Korea beyond the measures imposed by the UN Security Council. So, long story short, there is a food shortage in North Korea that they're saying is the worst in decades. And If you cannot get fertilizer to them, this is going to continue to increase because they need it to grow the crops. So we have to pay attention to what's going on around us. Going to go to some of the comments here. Thank you for the super chat, Anoon. All the North Koreans have to do is open a free trade pact with Russia and China. They could do that. I don't think they're going to do that, though. Wary says their terrible equation seems to be sanctions plus starvation plus political unrest equals regime change and profit. Gotta shut down that bad math. LOL. Astro says that's what sanctions do. They hit the people and force the state to budget militarily in response. The resources will always be directed to the state before the public. There you go. And thank you for the super sticker, Anoon. Thank you. We are moving on to our next story. You guys are cracking me up with some of the comments. You guys are cracking me up. We're going to move on to our next story. This one is a little bit more lighthearted. I mean, that one's kind of heavy. That was kind of heavy. We're going to move on to something not as heavy because I don't think many of us really care about what happens with King Charles. But King Charles, he is not having a good week. You know, the king's coronation is coming up and he seems to be having a difficult time getting people to actually attend. And I'm talking about celebrity guests, people that, let's just say the queen did not have a problem securing. He is having a difficult problem. Nobody seems to want to hang out with Charles. There could be a reason for that, which we'll get into after this particular clip here. But let's find out, let's see what is happening with King Charles. Let me make sure I got the right. Well, let me switch this around. Yeah, here we go. This is interesting. Celebrities don't care to perform for King Charles III. Here we go. I'm not making this up. So there's King Charles III. This man never looks happy. We're going to have a little fun with this one. King Charles III, formerly known as the Prince of Wales, is due to have his coronation on May 6th, when the UK will officially crown Charles as king and Lady Camilla as queen consort at Westminster Abbey in London. It's historic event, a symbolically significant ritual that the UK has not performed since Queen Elizabeth II was crowned in 1953, a ceremony that involves a 700-year-old coronation chair and the sacred stone of scone, or stone of destiny, which has been used for the coronation of Scottish kings for centuries. The day after the big event, there will be a coronation concert at Windsor Castle, which should see a big crowd. 10,000 tickets have been given away to the British public and will feature celebrity performers, at least the ones who agreed to attend. Despite all the pomp and splendor, at least the ones who agreed to attend. What did I do? I skipped one. Oh, at least the ones who agreed to attend. Despite all the pomp and splendor, A-list celebrities don't seem to be particularly interested. I wonder why. A palace insider told the Daily Mail that Adele and Ed Sheeran were asked to perform at the coronation concert and both declined. Adele said no. King Charles was very keen to have the two British icons involved and personally requested their presence. The source said the talent team approached the two global superstars, but received replies that they were both unavailable, which was a massive disappointment. They are titans of the showbiz industry and are quintessentially British, but also known across the globe. It is such a shame, the source added. But wait, it gets worse. After I read this article, I thought to myself, like, maybe he could just invite the Spice Girls, give them a reunion of sorts. No, tell you what I want, what I really, really want. Harry Styles was also invited, but declined. The fact that Styles turned down an opportunity to wear one of his elaborate outfits at a royal celebration is genuinely shocking. Oh, dear. Elton John, close friend of the late Princess Diana, was reportedly at the top of the King's list, but also declined to perform at the concert, which perhaps isn't quite as surprising. British singer Robbie Williams was invited and declined. Do you guys know who Robbie Williams is? Did I tell you? Robbie Williams, he was a part of this group called Take Six. Take That. Take Six is a different group. He was a part of this group called Take That. It was kind of like a British boy band. And then he went solo, and he was kind of wild and crazy too, also in real life. But he really popular over there. Reportedly, the palace even tried to orchestrate a Spice Girls reunion. Oh my God. I'm so sorry. This is a mess. This is a hot mess. Eric, let me know if I'm fuzzy. It says my connection's unstable, but I seem to be still going here, unless I'm freezing. Or nope, I'm not freezing. Okay. I'm sorry. That was kind of funny. To orchestrate a Spice Girls reunion concert, which, if successful, might even have eclipsed Charles's coronation, especially if Victoria Beckham were to join, right? Because she's married to David Beckham. That would actually bring out a large crowd. Alas, it wasn't to be. The Spice Girls remain separated. Is Jumpy? Anything open on the other tabs? No. Let me see. I don't have any other windows open. Let me double check. No. I don't have anything else open. Who knows? I might just need to reboot this thing, but I don't have time to do that now. Sorry, guys. You'll have to bear with me here. So the Spice Girls is a no. Not a good omen for the beginning of Charles's reign. Indeed, King Charles III already seems to lack the quiet charisma and magnetism of the late Queen II. Surely she would have united the Spice Girls with a single wave of her scepter, like Thanos assembling the Infinity Stones. Charles doesn't seem to have much luck due to be crowned just as the archaic institution has aged out. The announcement that Charles would inherit the throne was instantly met with calls to end the British monarchy. Reportedly, Australians do not want to see King Charles face. Reportedly, Australians do not want to see King Charles' face on their money. Okay. This is funny. They would much rather have Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter. The palace, however, did manage to rustle up some celebrities to perform for the new monarch. Gary Barlow, Mark Owen, and Howard Donald are due to headline the coronation concert, which will also feature Kylie and Danny Minogue, Andrew Lloyd Webber, and Lionel Richie. As for Adele and Ed Sheeran and Elton John, King Charles III will just have to make do with Spotify like everyone else. Eric, do you want to pop on for a second and I will pop back in if it's freezing? Because it is freezing. I can just reconnect and I'll come back. Just let me know. Okay. Yes, he's still alive. Lou's Theron Talman, is Lionel Richie still alive? Yes, he's still alive. Oh man. Eric, do you want to pop on so I can reconnect real quick? And then I'll come back and I'll just finish. I just need to, yeah.
All right. Catching me by surprise here. How's everybody doing? Yeah, Sabby had a little bit of connection problems, so we're going to pop on here. Let me look at, see, all right. Let's look at some chats. We had a couple come through here. Let's see, Lou said, I got 99 problems, but a king ain't one of them. Yeah, or being a king isn't one of them. And thanks for the super chat from Mr. Roger Meadows. Did he try Return of the Mac? Mark Morris. Thanks for that one, Roger. And yeah, Sabby will pop right back on in a second. She's just doing a quick kind of a reset and whatnot. Let's see. And just in terms of what's coming up, this is not a call-in night, but if you want call-in, you can, I believe the plan is for that on Sunday for doing some call-in on the 4 p.m. show is when you catch more Sabby. She's back. Don't worry.
Am I still okay?
I think you're good.
Okay. I don't know what happened. Anywho, part of it could be in reference to King Charles. Part of it could be due to the fact that some people are not happy. Oh, it started doing it again. That's very weird. Let me just double check something really quick, guys. Yeah, it's working for everybody else too. Like everything else is fine. It just seems like it's just StreamYard because anyway, I'm just going to play this video and we'll see what happens. Some people feel like it could be partly due to the fact of the relationship that he has with Prince Harry and Meghan. And there's something else that happened in reference to that. So let's see if this may have something to do with it.
The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have been asked to vacate their British base, Frogmore Cottage, the couple's spokesperson has confirmed. They were reportedly told to leave the property by Buckingham Palace in January, days after Prince Harry published his memoir, Spare. The home in the grounds of Windsor Castle had allegedly been offered to the Duke of York. Buckingham Palace is yet to comment. Our royal correspondent Sarah Campbell reports.
Since leaving the UK for a new life in the Harry and his wife.
Sorry, the type VNC. Okay.
They've stayed.
Oh my God, this thing. Hold on. Let me come back out. Yeah, it seems to happen when I play this, so I don't know what's going on. Let me try it again. Okay, here we go.
Reports.
Since leaving the UK, new life in the States, Prince Harry and his wife Meghan have returned just a handful of times. And when they've done so, such as last June for the Jubilee, they've stayed in Frogmore Cottage, the house gifted to them by the late Queen. The 5-bedroom property is situated within the grounds of Windsor Castle. The Duke and Duchess spent more than £2 million on rent and refurbishments, according to royal accounts. But their spokesperson has confirmed the Sussexes have now been asked to vacate the property. Once again, it's put royal relations back on the front pages, with the King reported to have sanctioned the move and Prince Andrew allegedly being lined up to move in once the Sussexes are out. Buckingham Palace has offered no comment on what are considered private family matters. This all comes in the wake of Prince Harry's memoir Spare and the publicity campaign which accompanied it, and their 6-part TV series, putting the couple's grievances with the royal family in front of a global audience.
Okay, so long story short, if you did not see that documentary that was on Netflix with Harry and with Meg, that has obviously increased tensions between them and everyone else that are members of the royal family. So if you haven't seen that, I think it's still on Netflix. Definitely go check that out. They revealed some things about Prince William and other family members that obviously I don't think the royal family wanted people to know. So, but what's crazy is like, so that happened. And then also Prince Harry wrote that book that's coming out. So there's that as well. And then on top of that, they still had the cabin or the cottage, the Frogmorth, whatever. They still had that cottage in England, even though they were living here in the United States. Obviously, you guys know the Queen passed away. They did go to the Queen's funeral. Keep in mind, that was after all this crazy stuff happened with their tell-all documentary. And so, you know, long story short, King Charles was like, I'm taking the cottage away from you guys. Which honestly, to me, I didn't feel like it was that big of a deal because I'm like, you guys don't live there anymore. You said you're giving away your titles. You don't want those anymore. And you guys pieced out. So to me, I was just like, okay, whatever. But what's crazy is that they decided to give the cottage to Prince Andrew. That's the weird part. It's like, to me, it's like, you gave it to him? That family, man, that family is... Oh my God, Violin goes, I didn't even know she died. Oh my God, Violin. Oh my God, Violin. Yeah, so they decided to give it to Andrew, Prince Andrew instead. The Predator. So the reason why I think some of the celebrities said no or said they were busy is because of some of the information that came out in that documentary that I watched and some of the information that's probably coming out in Harry's book. I mean, look, it's not like they said great things about the family members, but I can just tell you this. All I know is that family has a lot of problems based on what I've seen. Watch The Crown. And then after each episode, do your own research to see what was real and what wasn't real. Cause you know, they exaggerate in those kind of documentaries, but and you'll see what I mean when I say that family was crazy. Like crazy, crazy. Thank you for the super chat, Snork. Frogmore will be more like a prison for Andrew. I don't know. But that's that. So poor King Charles. I don't think that's going to work out for him. I want to get to this last story here, which is the Twitter files. I'm looking at my time. I'm pressed for time here. But I do want to make sure I covered this because this is part 17 of the Twitter files. So yes, there is more that is happening. Now, Matt Taibbi did release this. I think he released it yesterday. Twitter files number 17, new knowledge, the Global Engagement Center and state-sponsored Blacklist. Now, these are people who were blacklisted on Twitter, Twitter accounts that were blacklisted, and it's sponsored by the state. So let's go on. I'll make it a little bit bigger. On June 8th, 2021, an analyst at the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensics Research Lab wrote to Twitter, "Hi guys, attached you will find around 40K Twitter accounts that our researchers suspect are engaging in inauthentic behavior and Hindu nationalism more broadly." And here's a screenshot of that here. That's coming from Andy Carvin. What kills me about this is that they actually, again, they made the emails. Emails are traceable. Hi guys, attached you'll find the spreadsheet of around 40K Twitter accounts. So they included an entire spreadsheet for them to dive into. DFR Lab said it suspected 40,000 accounts of being paid employees or possibly volunteers of India's Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP. But the list was full of ordinary Americans with no connection to India and no clue about Indian politics. So here we go again with them, going after accounts that they thought was something that it wasn't. Crazy, right? Let's go on. I have no connection to any Hindu folks, just a Reagan Republican here in Connecticut. That came from Bobby Hailstone. A Hindu nationalist, I've never even been out of this country, let alone the state of New Jersey. That came from Lady D, 1861. These people are insane, said Crystal Woods. Twitter agreed. One reason many of the accounts remain active. Thanks, Andy, replied Trust and Safety Chief Yoel Roth. So you guys know Yoel Roth has been in all of these pretty much. I think just much every Twitter file I've talked about, or Twitter file release I've talked about, he's been a part of it in these emails. He goes on to say, I spot checked a number of these accounts and virtually all appear to be real people. And here's a screenshot of that email exchange here. Let's go on. Boop. Go to the number 5. I don't know how he skipped number 6. Oh, that one was deleted. DFR Lab is funded by the U.S. government, specifically the Global Engagement Center. Director Graham Brookie denies DFR Lab. It is, blah, 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 blah. I cannot talk tonight. Director Graham Brookie denies DFR Lab. It uses tax money to track Americans, saying its GEC grants have an exclusively international focus. But Americans on DFR's list, like Maricel Urbanek, are unconvinced its focus is exclusively international. This is un-American, she says. She immigrated from Castro's Cuba. They do this in places that don't believe in free speech. So here's a screenshot here of her account. Let's go on. The Global Engagement Center is usually listed as a State Department entity. It's not. Created in Obama's last year, GEC is an intra-agency group within state whose initial partners included the FBI, the DHS, the NSA, the CIA, DARPA, Special Operations Command, and others. And here's a screenshot here. So you can see all the other organizations here. So there you go. The alphabet letter agencies, basically, guys. That's what you're looking at here. So Matt goes on to say GEC's mandate to recognize, understand, expose, and counter foreign disinformation. On the surface, it's the same mission the United States Information Agency fulfilled for decades, with a catch. USIA focused on foreign disinfo. GEC's focus is wider. And he has a copy of the section 1 here, where it says establishment of the Global Engagement Center. The Secretary of State shall establish the Global Engagement Center, which shall lead the coordination, integration, and synchronization of government-wide communication activities directed at foreign audiences abroad in order to counter the messaging and diminish the influence of international terrorist organizations, including the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, Al-Qaeda, and other violent extremists abroad, with specific responsibilities as set forth in Section 3 of this order. He goes on to say it's an incubator for the domestic disinformation complex. All the ish, I have to be careful with the language on here now. All the ish we pulled in other countries since the Cold War, some morons decided to bring home. GEC could have avoided controversy by focusing on exposing and answering disinformation within research and a more public approach, as USIA did. Instead, it funded a secret list of subcontractors and helped pioneer an insidious and idiotic new form of blacklisting. So here we go. Here, GEC asked Twitter to review 499 accounts as foreign disinformation for reasons that include using Signal to communicate and tweeting the hashtag. Now, how many of you use Signal? I use Signal. I mean, this is just ridiculous. This is ridiculous. You're going after people because they use Signal and because they use Hashtag, listen to this. Using the hashtag Iranians debate with Biden. This is who they went after. So here's a screenshot here where you can see the list of accounts on the left-hand side, and it says what they use. These accounts use one of the hashtags, and then it says the Twitter campaign was organized in a private Telegram channel. See, that's another thing. They're even going after, they were looking into people using Telegram, Signal, those other communication apps. Like, I don't know if you guys use like Telegram or whatever, but those are other communication apps that people are using. This is just ridiculous. As if they were trying to hide something, right? First of all, it's definitely not uncommon for people that are international, that are abroad, to use Telegram, by the way. That's pretty common with friends of mine that live in Europe. He goes on to say, here are 5,500 names GEC told Twitter it believed were Chinese accounts engaged in state-backed coordinated manipulation. It takes about -10 seconds to find non-Chinese figures. And here's a screenshot here. So here's a list of the names. So they were wrong about that as well. Let's go on. GEC's Chinese list included multiple Western government accounts and at least 3 CNN employees based abroad. Not exactly Anderson's besties, but CNN assets, if you will, quipped Twitter's Patrick Conlon. A total crook, added Trust and Safety Chief Yoel Roth. And here's a screenshot of this communication here, where you can see it's initiated by Yoel Roth, and it says, as in CNN, and then the response here from Patrick Conlon, the account at Jenny CNN, which is the work account for a digital features editor for CNN. And it mentions other accounts as well. So they were even going after people that were part of mainstream media. This is too much. This is too much. GEC passed some good information to Twitter, but mostly not. The root problem was exemplified by a much circulated 2020 report, Russian Pillars of Disinformation and Propaganda. And then here's that here. So notice how it says U.S. Department of State. And then here's a screenshot here, how Russia's disinformation and propaganda spreads. And then they have a whole different path here. This is hilarious to me. Boy, I tell you. The GEC report was contradictory. On one hand, it offered reasoned evidence that a specific outlet like the Strategic Cultural Foundation was partnered with the Russian Foreign Ministry, which would make it a true proxy site. So they have a screenshot here where you can see that. It says proxy site profiles, the Strategic Culture Foundation. Let's go on. The same report advanced a far lazier idea. Along with state actors, groups that generate their own momentum should also be seen as parts of a propaganda ecosystem. Independents, GEC said, should not confuse those trying to discern the truth. And I want to show you this screenshot of this as well. It says, introduction, understanding the Russian disinformation and propaganda ecosystem. And highlighted down here, it says, the GEC has developed the ecosystem concept as a way to contextualize the threat posed by Russia in this field. So let's go on. Wow, they really, all of this that happened, all of this they did reaching out via Twitter, it's very strange to me. So he goes on to say here, the ecosystem is not a new concept. It's been with us since Salem, guilt by association. As one Twitter exec put it, if you retweet a news source linked to Russia, you become Russia linked. Does not exactly resonate as a sound research approach. Now, this goes to an outlet like RT. Now, think about this. How many times have people retweeted tweets from RT or responded to tweets from RT in a positive way? Remember what happened to all of the accounts on Twitter of everyone that worked for RT? Remember all of them? A lot of those people received that label underneath their name that said Russia affiliated content. You know what I'm saying? Like it was just ridiculous. But that's what they were basically doing here. They were trying to attach people based on guilt by association. And just because you have that association doesn't mean that you are what they're looking for. Let's go on. And there's the screenshot of this here. As always, any info share is appreciated. Their methodology, if you retweet a news source linked to Russia, you become Russian linked. That is absolutely ridiculous. Watch what you retweet, guys, I guess. GEC sent Twitter a series of reports on a series of topics, often employing the ecosystem concept. Its report on France attributes membership in the Yellow Vest movement as being Russia aligned, is how Twitter's Aaron Roderick put it. Now, you guys know about the Yellow Vests in France, right? Like they were a big deal. Like there were people who really hit the streets. They really went out there to change the system. That's why they have some of the benefits that people have in France right now is because of the Yellow Vests. Those were the people who really rose up. So Twitter, this company, GEC, they actually were starting to identify the Yellow Vest activists as Russia aligned. The activists. GEC's report on China was more entertainment value than anything, said Roderick. It equates anything pro-China, but also anything against China in Italy as part of Russia's strategy. Here's a screenshot of this here. Online media analysis, Russia-linked amplifiers promote pro-Chinese narratives across Italy's Twitter landscape. This is the weirdest, honestly, the fact that people actually took the time to do this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. Let's go on. Twitter staffers had professionalism. They tended to look at least once before declaring a thing foreign disinformation. This made them a tough crowd for GEC. Fortunately, there's an easier mark. The news media. GEC's game, create an alarmist report, send it to the slower animals in the journalism herd, and wait as reporters bang on Twitter's door, demanding to know why this or that ecosystem isn't obliterated. Twitter emails ooze frustration at such queries. UGGG reads 1, and I'll pull up the screenshot here. Oh, that one's blurred. I wonder if Matt knows these ones are blurry, or maybe he had to do it that way. Okay, yeah. So here's an email here, and this is from Ian Plunkett, and it says, checking in here to see if we have more info from state. We've CNN on to us this evening with renewed focus over the weekend, expecting a round of media on this tomorrow. So basically where GEC couldn't get Twitter to act, they got the media to act. All they had to do was send the same information that they sent to Twitter, and the Twitter employees were like, let us look this over first. Actually, you're wrong. These accounts are not what you say that they are. So they said, okay, it's not going to work with you guys. Let's send it to the media because the media will eat that up. Let's go on. Twitter disagreed with GEC's alert about Russian disinfo in South America, which appeared to confuse cause and effect. As Roderick's put it, I believe what they mean is there was a surge in accounts that agreed with Moscow-aligned narratives equals Moscow controlled. And you can see a copy of that email here. This one is blurry. This is a blurry image too, but I was just letting you know that the receipt is there. I wonder if Matt knows that some of these images are blurred. Roth noted Brett Schaefer of the Alliance for Securing Democracy was quoted in Frankel's story and said, seems like ASD are back at their old tricks. And here we have a screenshot of this here. Again, this is coming from Yoel Roth, and it says strong +1 to everything Aaron said. It's certainly true that Russia operates an influence operation in Latin America, principally via the Spanish language RT, which is the highest engagement RT account globally, without more evidence to back up the more dramatic claims, I don't think there's much we'd want to do here. So again, this was another example of a Twitter employee pushing back against the state Blacklist organization, asking them to remove people or report people that actually didn't do anything wrong or didn't go against the Twitter guidelines. Let's go on. Roth was referring to the fact that the ASD created Hamilton 68. Remember, we talked about that release with the Twitter files. Another guilt by association scheme detailed in Twitter files number 15. The Hamilton dashboard claimed to track accounts linked to Russia influence activities, but the list was largely made up of Americans. Remember, we went over that one. If you haven't seen that, I think I clipped that one. I did clip that one. Yes. You can just watch the clip. That way you don't have to sort through the live stream. Just saying. The Hamilton 68 dashboard creator J.M. Berger was on the GEC payroll until June of 2017, just before the dashboard's launch. Hamilton claimed the list was the fruit of more than 3 years of observations. Berger unequivocally denies working on Hamilton for GEC, of course. J.M. Berger says, I checked my records to verify my recollections, and I need to correct the timeline. I worked for GEC as a contractor through June 2017, not January. The Hamilton 68 dashboard employed digital alchemy to create streams of headlines tying Americans to foreign disinformation. The ecosystem reports GEC and many disinformation laboratories. Feed reporters are often just subtle versions of the same thing. And we showed those on the Hamilton 68 one. In a crucial in-house Q&A in mid-2017, Roth was asked if it was possible to detect Russian fingerprints using Twitter's public data. Though you can't make inferences, he said. In short, no. This is insane. How could this not be a privacy violation? Trying to detect fingerprints? I worry about social media sometimes. Like, I really do. That's really suspect. Let's go on. Twitter therefore knew the first days of foreign interference mania that the media zone was flooded with bad actors playing up cyber threats for political and financial reasons, GEC included. GEC has doubled their budget by aggressively overstating threats through unverified accusations that can't be replicated either by external academics or by Twitter. That comes from Roderick's. And we've seen this happen before, right? Whereas like they don't even actually have this information verified. But sometimes that's not even what you need. Sometimes all you have to do is spread it and say it enough and repeat it enough on many different outlets for people to believe it and not even ask for proof. Let's go on. The same is true of New Knowledge, the scandal-plagued company staffed by former NSA officials that the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence hired to do expert assessments of the initial batches of suspect Facebook and Twitter accounts. They went after everything. They literally went after everything. This piece here, I think, is important. After Politico cited a New Knowledge report to the SSCI as evidence for what it called a sweeping effort to sow divisions, Twitter dug in. NK pointed to 5 supposedly Russian accounts it said were relatively easy to find with the Twitter public API. Roth scoffed. And this is when Politico ran that story. Reports show Russia mounted sweeping effort to sow divisions, support Trump. You know, Politico, I think a lot of people, for whatever reason, think that that is more so of a trustworthy source. They're also connected to big money, too. Just FYI, if you guys didn't know that. Politico is also connected to big money. And then I do want to end it with this because this goes on and on and on. And we won't have time to go through all of this tonight. But anyway, long story short, this was another agency that was blacklisting accounts or asking Twitter employees to blacklist accounts that were not that weren't doing anything wrong, basically. But they were not violating Twitter's community guidelines. And when that didn't work, they wanted to go to the media. Matt Taibbi ends this by saying, for more on these and other Twitter topics, check out Schellenberger, MD, and I will be testifying in the House on Thursday. This is the big news. This is huge. Schellenberger and I will be testifying in the House on Thursday, March 9th at 10 a.m. Who's going to be watching that? You guys going to watch? You guys going to watch? Some of us may not be able to see it live, but I'm sure we can catch like clips of it or something like that on YouTube. He went on to say, we're humbled and grateful to Jim Jordan and Judiciary GOP for the invitation. So you see who sent the invite out, right? It's the Republican Party sent out the invite, not the Democrats, that's for sure, because they were implicated in the Twitter files. So that's that. So stay tuned for that, guys. Remember, Thursday at 10 a.m. DC said, yeah, I love C-SPAN. I know, Robert, I know. Robert said Jim Jordan. I know. Thank you for the super chat, the king. The Twitter files should be all over the news. We are watching freedom of speech die in real time. Yeah, this is 100%. And like, I'm still trying to cover them. I know I started with the very first one, and I may have missed one or two here and there. If I didn't cover it on here, I covered it on RBN. But for the most part, I've been staying on the Twitter files. And I think we still need to continue to talk about them because it's very damning. It really is. And it just shows you that you really can't trust. You can't trust it, man. You can't trust some of these social media sites. That's what I'm saying. Like, oh, well. All right, guys. It is time for me to skadoodle. It is time for me to go. It is a little bit past my time, but I really do have to go now, though. But I hope you guys have a really great weekend. And I hope you really take in what the railroad workers said. You know, I'm not live tomorrow. I'll upload clips, and then I'll be live again on Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern time. All right. You guys know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.